today. And I'm really glad that you're able to be part of the webinar, so welcome. I thought what I would do is would just describe a little bit about me and who I am and what I do. There's actually quite a lot of you on the line tonight. So I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes explaining to you what I do and the reason why I'm actually running this webinar and why I guess I could run it. So we talk about 6 ways to deal with difficult, rude people at work. And even though I'm really talking about work, I guess I'm talking about 6 ways to deal with difficult or rude people, full stop. So really, when you talk about how to deal with difficult people, the process and the skills are exactly the same. Whether you're at work, whether you're in a relationship at home, whether you're in the supermarket, the things remain the same. So I'll begin now. And a little bit about me. Okay, so who am I? My name is Karen Walsh. I own a business called, obviously, Pure Magic International Business Solutions. I do a lot of leadership development, and I also focus a lot on building teams. So I'm working in Australia, I'm working in Africa, and I work in Fiji. So I'm in Fiji probably about 3 or 4 months of the year working with different organizations. And my background really is in leadership and team development, but also as a psychologist and a uni lecturer. And working on 3 continents is an absolute gift. I'm so pleased that I'm able to do that. I've been developing leaders to grow organizations for over 25 years. So I'm working with boards, I'm working with business owners, CEOs, but I'm also working with team leaders and supervisors down the line, which I love just as much. It doesn't really matter which level I work at. I enjoy working with all leaders because I think they bring their different challenges. And my firm focus really in the work that I do when I'm working with leadership is on developing leaders and teams. And I'll always say that there's greater, more impactful results through teams that work well together. Although having said that, I do work with and have come across various teams when I've gone into an organization where people can be actually quite disparaging to each other and team members don't get along well and can be very rude and disrespectful, and that's part of obviously what we will be talking about this evening. So I write books, I write ebooks, I write column for the media, and I'm speaking probably at about 15 to 20 conferences a year. So overall, I just love what I do, and I have such an amazing, privileged life in terms of developing people and, you know, of all races, colors, and creeds. And I also do quite a lot of work in growing women. So I run an organization called Empowering Women to Thrive, and it's about helping women, I guess, become more impactful in the lives that they lead. So here's just a couple of pictures of me working with some of my clients in Fiji and Africa and Australia. Just a bit of a fun slide to show you the sort of work that we do. So if you work with people who are rude or difficult, I mean, you know, do you ever feel like one of these after a hard day working with people who are rude or defensive and who make your life at work hell? Now, this graphic is an interesting one because I always look at this and think, well, I wonder who's giving who a hard time. And if you have a look at that particular picture, type to me, tell me which one you think would be more aggressive from that picture. Would it be the guy on the left or the guy on the right? I'd be really interested to what you have to say, because 75% of our communication is done through body language. And so if you take that statistic, which of these is being more difficult? Oh, okay. So Mariana says the guy on the left because his body language is kind of more in the other guy's face. And that looks like that could possibly be the fact. Who knows? But it's an interesting thing to consider when you look at body language. But, you know, I'm sure that probably some of you work with people who create hell for you. So is it your manager? Is it your colleague? Is it somebody in another department? And you probably sometimes go home thinking, what on earth am I going to do with this person? Or more importantly, they make your life just plain miserable. And it's really difficult to go to work 8, 9, even 10 hours a day knowing that you've got to go and work with somebody who makes you so miserable. Is there anybody like that? Do any of you work with any people like that? If you do, just throw through some questions so I can see the kind of issues with which we're dealing. That would be great. So I always say after a hard day, do you look like one of these people? Upside down, like, oh my gosh, that person just turned my life upside down yet again today. They were rude or they were difficult and I didn't know what to do about them or how to deal with it. Or do you figure, oh my gosh, what a bad hair day. Every time I walk into this person or I meet them or I have to work for them, I feel as if I'm having a bad hair day. or I'm so tired of rude and disrespectful people. I actually chose that picture because I like it. I sometimes think I come home looking like this. However, I must share with you, sometimes I leave in the morning looking like this. So I think that's probably even more scary. Just at the outset, I also forgot to mention, which I should have at the beginning, I've actually got bronchitis. So if I sound a bit wheezy or a bit raspy, it's because I'm not very well, but that doesn't matter. I'm still here and loving talking to you, but I just wanted you to be aware of that anyway. So let's just talk very briefly about what a team is. I think this is an important question because when we're talking about rude and disrespectful people at work, you know, people often say to me, oh, they're part of a team and they're, you know, great teamwork. And when I ask them about what a team is, they can't actually tell me what a team is. And I guess the same question, if I ask you, what is a team? What would you say a team is? So pop me a couple of suggestions that you've got, and I'll tell you whether I agree with you. So here's one, working together. Absolutely, a team is about people working together. But however, you can still work with somebody, but not necessarily be a team. So a team is about working together. It is about a group of people working together to achieve a goal. And obviously teams can be temporary or indefinite. You know, teams can go on and on, or some teams are formed together to sort of sort out a project or a particular issue that needs to be resolved. With individuals sharing responsibility, the group can take advantage of all the collective talent, knowledge, and experience of each team member. And the words that I want to pick up there are two, responsibility, and the second one is collective talent. Because what I find when I'm dealing with teams very often, when I go into organizations and teams are not working well, is that you'll find some people who are often rude and disrespectful, not taking responsibility for their part of the team. And obviously then if you've got people like that, even with a bad attitude, who don't take responsibility and aren't accountable, then other people sadly have to pick up the slack. As soon as you've got that dynamic going on in a team or an organization, you start to get resentment and frustration, and then just generally bad vibes arise and things don't work as well. Collective talent is a really interesting term because it's all about having a look at the people who you work with in a team and really thinking about, well, what are the talents that we have? What are the talents that we can use? And I mean, for example, I might be good at typing, or Joe might be good at math. And therefore, how can we use those two skills together so that we can work better together? When I'm working with dysfunctional teams, often you'll have people don't use collective talent. So they don't want to share talents. They don't want to give other people the opportunity of using what they do so well. And that's really when you start often having dysfunctional team behavior and you have people who don't work well together. So if we move forward then, this is a really, really important slide for tonight, and I just wanted to share it with you because one of the reasons I wanted to tell you about this is that, you know, traditionally in organizations we think, oh, well, teams are all about the task, getting the job done. And historically, if you think about organizations, let's say recruitment. Okay, we want somebody to type and we want somebody to do report writing and we want somebody to do the admin. So they send out the recruitment, you know, advert, and people will apply and 10 are shortlisted. And traditionally then, if those 10 people have got those 3 skills, then they start to cull them down to the one that they like most. But they have not traditionally focused on relationships. They've focused on tasks, getting the job done, you know, business development, writing reports, whatever it may be. And so, you know, completing projects and reports on time. In terms of relationships, and I think this is a really important point, because highly performing teams in modern day world are those teams that have an equal focus on both tasks and on relationships. So what you've got is that you've got a focus on where we're trying to get the job done, and we're very, very goal outcomed and focused, but also what we're doing is that we're focusing on having great relationships. And if you are a team that focuses on tasks only and not relationships, that team or that organization can never be highly performing. If you focus on relationships at the expense of tasks, you're really running a social club. So the point is that I'm trying to say to you is at the end of the day, if you are in a team, it's about an equal focus on tasks and relationships. And I think many, many organizations don't really understand that. Certainly when I'm working with leaders, often when I tell them about this, they think, oh, I didn't really realize that relationships are so critically important. So here's a question. If you think about tasks in your team, right? And you think about, okay, out of 10, how would you rate how well the performance of your team is out of 10 at tasks? So it could be 2 out of 10, 8 out of 10. And if some of you can shoot me a couple of answers through, that would be fabulous. And once you've given your team a score out of 10 for tasks, do the same now for relationships. How well do they relate with each other? Is it harmonious? Do they get along well? Do we resolve conflict? So here we go. I've got John. John's told me that your tasks is 6 and your relationships is 3. Okay, so if you're looking at a team with 6 as tasks and 3 in relationships, essentially you've got some people who are somewhat competent, can get the job kind of done, but the relationships or the lack thereof or the bad relationships are actually getting in the way of getting the job done well. And I guess that makes my point clear. You've got to have good tasks done and great relationships that work to really thrive. So what precisely, let's just look at this. When we talk about difficult or rude behavior, I think it's always important to understand, well, what is that? Because I'm working, for example, in a government organization and they say, oh, Karen, we want you to help us with these difficult people. And I say, well, what does difficult mean? And then I'm thinking about a disability service provider I'm working with, and they say, oh, you know, we've got a lot of rude people that we need help with. And then I'm thinking about another organization I'm working in Fiji with, and I say, so what is it? Oh, well, people are just disinterested, rude, and don't care. And I say, well, what does that mean? So I think it's important at the outset to really understand, so what does difficult or rude mean to you? And so I'm going to show you, I think it's 9 different types of difficult or rude behavior, which I love. I think it's so expressive. And tell me if you work with any of these. So obviously difficult or rude is obviously rude. Angry can be quite difficult. People are angry all the time. People who blame each other. It's not my fault I didn't get the job done. You know, I didn't get this done because of you. A lot of the kind of finger pointing at other people. People who are impatient. I was working with a manager the other day who was just so impatient with his people. And he said to me, I just find it so hard to find good staff, and all these people are idiots and they can't get the job done. And I said to him, I would find working for you really, really unhealthy for my brain and my soul. And he said to me, why? And I said, because you're so impatient. Why don't you just teach people what you want them to do, show them, and rather treat them well? Impatience will get you nowhere. Irritable, similar to impatient. And if you've got people who are irritable, if you think about it, you don't want to ask them for help. You don't want to ask them to for any question that you need answered, because you just think as if you're an imposition. You just kind of feel as if you're just an annoyance. And when you've got those sort of people, you don't feel as if you're part of a really effective team. Oh, this is a classic one, the sulker. Tell me, do any of you actually work with sulkers? So they come in and they're angry about something, so they ignore you one day, or forget one day, they ignore you for a week, or they ignore the whole department, and they come in quietly and they sit at the desk, and they don't say hello, they don't say boo, they don't say, would you like a cup of coffee? I find sulkers really, really annoying because they're like children, if you think about it. Children sulk. Adults aren't supposed to sulk, but I'm afraid to say many do, and I find that very difficult behavior. And attacking. Do you work with people who are attacking, people who are blaming you and attacking you and embarrassing you and making you feel undervalued and making you feel stupid? All of these kind of things are constituting of very difficult behaviors. But let's have a look at these behavioral types. Okay, you ready? Right, let's watch these. Oh, sorry, I'm one slide ahead of myself. So when you've got behavior like that, what can you do? Well, you can run like hell, get out of there. But sometimes you can't, because heaven forbid if it's the boss, where you're going, nowhere in a hurry. Stand and fight. Well, I think sometimes it's preferable to stand and fight than run like crazy all the time. Although I think fight generally is going to make your career pretty short and sweet. I think it's about calmly make a stand, which is what we talk about, assertive behavior. So I was running a webinar just before this around teaching women to communicate assertively and with confidence. And one of the key aspects of communicating, whether it's women or men, is to be assertive, calmly make a stand. What you can also do is think about, okay, so maybe change your attitude to them or what's going on. So I'll give an example. My daughter was working with a boss who she doesn't particularly like, and he had asked her for a report to be completed and by yesterday. And she wasn't able to because the managing director, her boss's boss, called her in and asked her to help him with the project. So she spent the rest of yesterday helping him with the project. And so she couldn't get the job done for her manager. And her manager was so rude to her, you know, unreliable, and why don't you be transparent, and you can't do the job. And she was really upset. And so we talked about this morning, and I said, well, actually, hold on a minute, change your attitude, because he was right. You didn't get the job done purely because his boss, i.e. super boss, wanted you to help him. And obviously super boss had not told her boss. But at the end of the day, you didn't get done what he asked you to do. So what you could have done was told him that you were not able to do it and explain to him that you couldn't do it, and that would have been better. So she took that on board, and she realized that actually she should have done that, but that still doesn't excuse the behavior that he had, which was attacking of her. So by changing her attitude, I think ultimately her relationship with him might be able to change his attitude. So if you look at the different types of behavior, this is the fun part. I love them, types of difficult behaviors. And as we go through them, maybe you want to just write these down and decide whether you work with any of these, or not even work. I mean, I'm talking about in the workplace, but heavens, you could also be living with one of them, or you could be married to one of them, or you could have them as your partners or your children, or your mother-in-law. So here we go, your bulldozers. The classic people, they walk in and they flatten everything in front of them. So they don't listen, they don't care. They just do what they like. They talk over people. They have their comments, and they really are people who typically enjoy the sound of their own voice. If you've got a bulldozer as a leader, it's a really, really difficult place to live because they just don't listen. They don't solicit ideas. They're not interested. Most bulldozers lose good people. The bullies. Well, the bullies, two types of bullies, ladies and gentlemen. There's actually a lot of you on the line tonight. Two types of bullies. One would be covert. So those are the guys and gals who go underground, you know, who will make comments that are derogatory to you and you alone about you, but they would never do it in front of somebody. And then you've got the overt bully who will bully people in front of others, although in organizations today that does not tend to happen as much because obviously it's, you know, the result of litigation. So if people are seen to bully others, it could result in huge fines for not only the organization and their directors, but the bully themselves. And I was doing some research the other day that organizational workplace bullying and harassment costs you, listening to this, the Australian economy is $34 billion a year, due to absenteeism, workplace depression, presenteeism, which is people coming to work but not really doing anything, sick leave, etc. So $34 billion a year, I was staggered. The fire hose. I find these very difficult because the fire hose, or another word for them would be enthusiasm dampeners. So no matter what, they are the butt brigade. Hey, you might say, hey, let's try this. No, but that'll never work. Or, well, why don't we give this new particular project a go? Well, we have in the past, but it failed. Okay, so why don't we try and form a project team and, you know, try and see if we can't get some morale happening? No, because we've tried that before and it never works. The enthusiasm dampeners, and I find that really, really difficult because they really steal everybody's light. The light goes out when they walk in the door. Oh my gosh, the wafflers. Talk, 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 talk. A lot of hot air and not a whole heap of action. So they talk and talk a lot. A lot of the time it's superficial stuff. It's about the weather or the day or the dog that they've got that's sick or the nail polish that they've bought that doesn't work, and really not particularly meaningful stuff. And for a lot of people who want to get the job done and are serious about outcomes, they can be really difficult behaviors to deal with. The silent types. The silent types in many ways are, I think, the most difficult of all the types because of the fact that you don't know what you are dealing with. And another word for silent types is passive-aggressive behavior. So these are the people who will say one thing to you, but then do something else. Or they might not even say anything. They might just do things behind your back. And basically, essentially, if you are dealing with a silent type, silent behavior, ladies and gentlemen, is a form of punishment. So they are taking, or they think that they're taking their power from everybody else by sulking, ignoring them, and essentially all they're doing is being a pain in the butt, and nobody enjoys working with them. So I'm sure that every one of you on the line would have worked with any one or maybe all of those five. The sniper is more the passive-aggressive, that I was referring to earlier. So sniper, they'll take shots at you, but you don't know where they're coming from. And I always use the example of John F. Kennedy's assassination. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he had no idea where that bullet came from. He was dead before he knew it hit him. And when I was watching a documentary years ago about it, literally the guy who killed him was up in a building, sort of half a kilometer away, up a hill, round a corner, on the top, ledge of a shelf area, whatever it was, near the top of a building. And so you don't know. He didn't see this shot coming. And if you think about workplaces, a classic example would be, let's say that you're sitting in a team meeting, right? And you get along really well with Joe. You and Joe have a good relationship, or so you think. And the boss says to all of you, so, who didn't finish the project this week? And Joe says, well, we all did, but we struggled because of, let's say Karen, my name. Well, we would have, but Karen made us late because she didn't get her act together on time. And I would sit there thinking, where did that come from? Because Joe and I thought were good colleagues, but clearly we're not. So it's a sniper. It's a shot that comes from nowhere that damages relationships. And I'll tell you what, I see it wherever I go. And it matters not which continent. The indecisive. Should I, shouldn't I? Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. Oh, I don't know. Should I do some more research? Well, I'll do a little bit more research before we get there. I'm not sure yet. Indecisives are people who will drive you crazy because they don't make decisions. They stall, they procrastinate, and I always say this, rather make a bad decision than no decision at all, as long as you learn from that bad decision. But if you've got indecisives, particularly in leadership roles that make no decisions, it can be very destructive for the team members down the line. Oh, this is probably my worst, besides actually sniper and then victim. So let's talk about the victim. Now, you all work with them. Nothing works because of this, or my life sucks because of that, or I didn't get the promotion because of this. So a victim is a person who blames everybody else for things that don't work out in their lives. So here's with my psychologist hat on. Can any of you just write me the answer? This is the question. Because in each of these behaviors, there's an outcome, right? So my question to you is, ladies and gentlemen, and there's a lot of you on the line, some of you would be able to answer this question. What is the benefit of being a victim in the workplace? Can any of you tell me? Just write it to me. What's the outcome, the positive outcome of being a victim? Anybody got any ideas? Okay, so Nat. Thanks, Nat. A victim is a person who doesn't take responsibility. So if they don't take responsibility for things, then in their mind, they're not accountable. And if they're not accountable, then ultimately what it means in their own minds is that it's everybody else's fault. And ultimately what happens with a victim is, and you see them in all walks of life, it doesn't matter. I was working with a man the other day. He says to me, I'm an alcoholic because my father was one, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather. In other words, this disease that I have is because of other people. Well, interesting, alcoholism is one of the few diseases that you can actually arrest. But he's so busy blaming other people for what he's got that he's taking no responsibility to get help to resolve the issue. or a victim at work. I mean, this is a beautiful one. I'll tell you this story. You'll love this. So I said to somebody the other day, why are you always late for work? And his comment to me was, well, because the bus is slow. The bus is slow. Well, I don't know, people. I don't know. I nearly died laughing. The bus is slow. The bus is not slow. He's slow. Or he doesn't get out of bed in time, so he misses the bus. Buses generally come on time. And so when I say to him, well, get up half an hour earlier, it's obviously inconvenience to him. He doesn't want to, so blames everything else. And then you've got the control freak. The control freak is difficult behavior because they control everything. They control when you come to work, when you go for lunch, when you leave. They control what you take out of the stationery cupboard, how many pencils, how many pens, even though it's not their job. Very controlling, very dominating, often micromanagers in the workplace. Why are you doing this? Why haven't you done it that way? And I'll tell you what my experience of control freaks is, that generally if they've got good people in the organization, they lose them quicker than you can say flash. People leave. So I think this is an important thing. The major reason why people at work are disrespectful, difficult, or rude is because they are allowed to be. Now, some of you may disagree with me. No, that's not true, Karen. And well, it's, the fact is that they just do what they want, or the fact is that they don't take responsibility, or the fact is that they come late and do whatever they like. I absolutely agree with all of those statements. Here I've got one from John. Thanks again, John. So what do you think? So you think that it's because they're allowed to, or because they're not allowed to? Well, you're saying, well, it's not about being allowed to, Karen. It's because they just do what they want. That's right, John. They do what they want because nobody is stopping them from doing it. In other words, they're allowed to do it. And I think that's a really critical point, is that when you have difficult or rude people in your team, it is because they are allowed to be difficult or allowed to be rude. So I'll go back to my example of my daughter. When I spoke to her about the same manager, and I said, so tell me a little bit about him. She said, well, Mom, everybody, whenever he walks in, he can be great one day, and the next day he's just so rude and so aggressive. And when, they were in a team meeting the other week, and this guy, let's call him Timothy. It's not his name, but we'll say Timothy. So Timothy was rude and attacking of everybody in the team, and there's 12 in the team. And Timothy said to another guy, let's call him Nick in the team, was rude to Nick. And Nick and Tim are generally quite good friends. And Ash, my daughter who's just joined this team, says to the other team members, well, how does this happen? And you know what the other team members say? The other team members say, oh, that's just Tim. You've got to just accept him for what he is. Well, here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, I don't buy that. I don't accept people for who they are when they are rude and disrespectful. Because if you allow that behavior to happen in organizations, you will condone it. Why are they allowed to behave badly? Well, often a lack of strong leadership. And honestly, in the 25 years that I've been doing this work, and on the 3 continents, it's the same thing, a lack of strong leadership, a lack of direction. So sometimes people get angry, they get frustrated because they don't know what they should be doing first. The team doesn't have great leadership or hasn't got clearly defined goals, a lack of clarity in their roles or what they're supposed to do. And so people get frustrated and they bulldoze others or they bully others. There's often a lack of feedback about their performance. I think this is a key critical output. When I was talking to you about my daughter's situation, I said to her, so when they say to you, oh, that's just Timothy's behavior, what do people do about it? And she says, well, Mom, they don't do anything. And I say, well, why not? And she says, well, because they just say, well, that's how he behaves. So they just tippy-toe around it. And then I said to her, so the boss, your manager's manager, is the CEO, correct? And she said, yes. And I said, well, why hasn't he done anything about it? She said, because she has no idea. She says, he just tolerates it. And if I go back to the very top point on the slide, a lack of strong leadership. Organizations with strong leadership, strong codes of conduct, cultures of collaboration and support, where behaviors like that are not tolerated, in fact, their performance appraised, you will never find behavior like that in highly performing teams. But often there's a lack of clear rules about how we behave, what we do, and what the expectations are. and I think that's a really clear point that I want to make tonight, is that, you know, if you talk about a code of conduct, so often in an organization, a code of conduct is in the HR manager's drawer under the desk behind a shelf. They're meaningless, ladies and gentlemen. Codes of conduct should be written by each individual team, and if you're going to write a code of conduct, write it collaboratively, as a team together. So as the leader, you don't do it, you write it with the team. Why? And you get everybody to contribute at least one item to the code of conduct. Why? Because in so doing, you're making them responsible and accountable for the behaviors that they say they want to see in their team. So you call them on it. And it's really interesting because the code of conduct in terms of dealing with difficult behavior at work has to be, and leadership, those two, but the code of conduct has to be the most powerful and most amazingly unused tool of them all. People just don't use them, and yet they are very powerful tools that you could even use as part of your performance appraisal if you do it well. Conflict is not addressed. This happens in a lot of organizations. Well, you know, that's just Joe, and if Joe's obviously having a bad day, so we'll just wait for Joe to calm down, and Joe will be better tomorrow. We sweep things under the carpet. We don't address them because we want peace at all times. Well, interestingly, here's the thing, that regardless of how much peace you want and how much conflict you don't want, let me promise you one thing as I sit here after doing this work for so many years. Unless you address conflict, it will get worse over time. And when I mean worse, not only worse in intensity, but worse in the consequences of the outcomes. More and more people are disillusioned, more and more anxiety, tension, frustration. And then what happens is sometimes you even get fisticuffs. I've seen that before. Or the whole team leaves because they can't stand one person. So when we're talking about why are they allowed to behave badly? Because not strong leadership, no real direction, lack of clarity about roles, feedback about their performance is poor or at all, clear roles about how we expect to behave, a code of conduct are not there, and conflict is swept under the carpet. And of course then the team culture slips into power struggles and, you know, personal agendas. So as I said just now, there's a lot of you on the line, and some of you, just tell me, do you know this behavior that I'm describing in this slide, or is this foreign to you? So write to me, some of you, tell me whether you have experienced this behavior or not at all. Okay, so there's 6 of you who have told me that, yep, so some of you have conflict not addressed, some of you have lack of clear rules, so no use of the code of conduct, and of course the one really is a lack of strong leadership. So why? Why are bad behaviors not really addressed? Okay, so I think the most important thing to say is that at the end of the day, when you've got dysfunctional teams or bad behavior or rude and disrespectful behavior, it is a leadership issue. It is not a team issue. It is manifested in the team, but the issue starts and finishes at leadership. In other words, the leader is allowing the behavior to continue. And as I'm saying on this slide, creating a highly supportive team culture is a leadership responsibility. Teams often try and resolve the issue, or they try and talk to the person, and I think that's an absolutely appropriate way to go, but it's still a leader who sets the expectations of this is how we will behave in the team, this is how this team will be with each other. And of course, if you've got a leader who's disrespectful, if you've got a leader who's rude, it becomes more and more difficult for you, because ultimately, how do you deal with a rude and disrespectful leader? It becomes very difficult. Some leaders don't know how to deal with people who are difficult, and neither do their colleagues, so they don't. They just let it fester. Often there are no consequences for this behavior. So, again, the example of Tim, no consequences. So Tim just continues being rude to people in teams, to individuals like my daughter. He's taken a shot at the CEO before. So it's like having children. If you don't discipline your children and they're naughty, they get naughtier. So if you don't discipline your staff, or at least tell them what your expectations of their behaviors are, they'll just continue, ladies and gentlemen. And often people tippy-toe around the problem. Don't want to deal with it, tippy-toe, tippy-toe. And as I said earlier, if we ignore it, it'll go away. No, it won't go away. It'll never go away. Others have tried so many times, but nothing changes. But don't worry, there are ways to resolve this. And it's really interesting that so many organizations don't know how. So help's on its way in getting teams together to get along well and to resolve rude and difficult behavior is not that clear, as long as, you know, people and you know how to deal with this. So why are people mainly rude or difficult? I think I threw this slide in here because I think it's quite an important one to understand. I think the psychology behind it. Not that you've got to excuse it, and I'm not saying we're excusing it, but we're understanding it. So here we go. These people might be frustrated about something at work, inefficient processes, systems, bad communication, ineffective leadership. They feel undervalued or ignored. So they want the job, they haven't got the job they wanted, people don't talk to them, they believe there's a lack of equality or fairness, so they get angry or disrespectful. They have always just been plain difficult, particularly when the needs are not met. And I honestly believe that there are people who are just plain difficult. Plain difficult probably in part because they don't know how not to be plain difficult. And yet what's interesting with this breed of person is that if they learn to be assertive and they learn to be professional and they learn to deal with it, they'd get a lot further than they do. They feel inadequate but overcompensate the sense of inferiority by becoming dominating and at worst a bully or a tyrant. Having dealt a lot with workplace harassment and bullying and also done a lot of work around domestic violence, bullies are people who suffer from an innate sense of inadequacy. Finished. So often if you've got a bully or a tyrant, there are people who come across as controlling, aggressive, badly behaved, but they're actually, you know, shivering inside. They don't feel good about themselves. Often rude or difficult people are spoiled, insensitive, and used to getting their own way. They have no idea how to deal with life challenges, so often do it badly. And also, as I said, they're allowed to get away with it. Often these people get a perverted sense of power by dominating or controlling or being rude and difficult. They may have a mental health issue, diagnosed or not diagnosed. One of the key things I often say to people is that when they're about to deal with difficult people, to show some empathy towards difficult people, because one of the reasons I say that it's difficult, rude people, they're not liked, nobody wants to be with them, nobody wants to hang out with them at lunch. They really generally aren't promoted unless they're the owner or, you know, they're best mates with the owner, a bit of nepotism. But overall, I feel sad for these people. And because they're just plain miserable and like to make other people's lives hell. So there you are from a psychological perspective. That's why people are rude or difficult. So let's talk quickly about the 7 steps to deal with rude people at work. And this is for leaders. So there are a lot of you on the line, and I know some of you. I don't know all of you. So I'm not sure who of you are leaders, leading teams or organizations who are not. So I thought I'd do 2 slides, one for leaders and one for people who are team leaders and colleagues. So for leaders, 7 steps. So enthuse troops by giving them, sorry, there's a typo, a vision and strategy to get there. So what is the vision of your team? Where is your team supposed to be going? And how will they know when they've got there? So we're all rowing in the same boat, but do we know where we're going? And often what I find in workplaces is that people squabble and get into conflict because they've got competing goals or competing expectations, and they squabble over nothing. And I think often it's because they don't know where they're going. And if they don't know where they're going, it's a leadership issue. Firm goals, clearly what they have to achieve by when and how we measure success. So if they don't have firm goals, firm position descriptions, firm key performance indicators, the amount of trouble that comes from not having key performance indicators is just untold. I see it time and time and time again. Solid rules about how we behave, a code of conduct and consequences, must be known, and people must be held accountable to live by them. So if the team with you comes up with a code of conduct, let's say 10 things, and they completely transgress one, which might be, let's say, we are achieving and supporting of each other, but they don't, then a clear thing to do is to haul them in and say, you are not doing what you said you would do. You're specific in what they're doing. So, for example, last Friday when Joe asked you for help, I heard you say, no, it wasn't your job. And we have agreed as a team that we will never say it's not my job. So I'm going to ask you about what happened there, because I'm not going to tolerate that behavior in my team. And ultimately, through this, you create a culture of achievement and support. And our mantra is that we help and support each other all the time. So this is where leadership shapes teams so that you can eradicate the rude or difficult behavior. By and large, I mean, I think sometimes life is that some of us are rude because life isn't working at home, or we're tired so we get difficult. I'm not talking about those one-off days, ladies and gentlemen. I'm talking about the general people who are fairly consistently rude. And the other thing is to deal with bad behavior efficiently and effectively through coaching, mentoring, development, training, supervision, but ultimately dismissal. Because if they're not going to behave well, they might be great at tasks, but absolutely abominable at relationships. And unless you address it, that bad behavior starts to eat away like a cancer, I'm afraid to say, at the good vibes in your team. And when you've got a team that is starting to fall apart because of bad behavior, as I said, it's a leadership issue that's manifested in dysfunctional team behavior. Evaluate and monitor performance. People say once a year. I say every day, all day. Not to control and not to be a control freak, but have a look at how your people are going. Give them feedback, well done, Joe, and what a fantastic job, Samantha, or hey, Trish, can we just talk about something I've noticed where you actually talk about something that you feel they're not doing that well? And I always think, of course, optimism and a can-do attitude culture starting at the top. So if you're really wanting to have a great team culture in your team, department, or organization, it starts with you at the top. So if you're rude and difficult and discouraging, let me tell you, you're going to have rude and discouraging people in your team. If you're optimistic with a can-do culture and attitude and you follow number 1 to 6, you will have the most amazingly highly performing team. So here's a question from Lizzie. So Lizzie, yes, so you're saying to me that your manager is great at relationships but not that great at tasks. That's pretty difficult because at the end of the day, some people would say to me, well, I'd rather them be good at relationships and the rest of the team can carry the tasks. Well, if you consider leadership, really teams do most of the leader's job because that's called delegation. However, if you've got a manager or a leader who's not doing any of the tasks or where they don't do it well, it ultimately is going to affect performance. So it does become a team issue, and my recommendation is for the team as a whole to address it with the leader. Of course, it's how you do it, not what you do. And ultimately, if that can't be resolved, unfortunately, then you'd have to get somebody like HR involved. But thanks for the question, Lizzie. It was a good one. Okay, so there are the 7 for people dealing with rude and disrespectful people at work if you're a leader, and 6 steps to deal with rude people at work if you're a colleague. Never ignore bad behavior, ladies and gentlemen. If you do in the long run, it will get worse, much worse. So ultimately, you have to address it. And ideally, you would address it either individually if the person's been rude to you. But if you feel that overall the impact is on the team, then there's nothing wrong for the team to address it. Approach the person calmly and respectfully requesting a meeting or discussion. And in the webinar I had just before this one of the key things if you're going to address these sort of issues is it's really key that you remain calm. And here's a really great point. Have your notes written out before you go into the discussion. So write out what you want to say in the beginning, write out what you want to say in the middle, and also what you want to say in the end. And I always say that if you're going to go and have a discussion with somebody who's rude and difficult, have some positives in there as well. In other words, things like, I always think that you're good at your job and you're really great at managing time. And then you get into, when you speak to me like that, I get really upset, so in future I'd like you not to. So that's the assertive technique, which is probably one of the most important communication techniques of them all, where you stand up for yourself, but you remain calm and in control. And remember that rude or difficult people are not happy people. Offer support even. Look, you could say, if it's, Nick who's being rude or difficult, you might say, look, I can appreciate that sometimes you get frustrated or sometimes things don't work out your way. Is there anything I can do to help you? Is there anything that you might need support with? And you might find, I've seen it on various occasions, that when you do offer support, that sometimes things just change completely around because they feel as if they have an ally. They feel as if somebody's there for them. Now, that might not work all the time, but just think about changing your mindset maybe. But probably out of all of those, being assertive is the most critical. So I'm not sure if I actually put it in here, but let's just have a look. I might come back to that. Explain the impact of their behavior on you and on the team. So, for example, when you are assertive, you would say, look, John, I appreciate that you're frustrated, and this is where the assertiveness technique comes in. So it's the event. When you speak about us as a team, the response, I feel, or we feel, very upset and undervalued. And the preferred outcome is we would prefer you, or we would like you not to do that in future, please. Because the impact of what you're doing is not good for the team. It's affecting how we all work with each other, how we all work with you, and it's making us all miserable. So moving forward, we'd like to have a collaborative and happy team. So I think the point I'm making is be assertive, but at the same time, when you are assertive, make the person understand that the way that they are behaving, being either rude, disrespectful, or whatever it is, and the impact it's either having on you as an individual or on the team, because that's really where the power of managing the disrespectful behavior lies. The fact that their behavior is affecting all of you. So the hamburger is positive area of concern, positive. So here you go. I really have enjoyed working with you, but over the last month I've felt hurt or upset by the things you do, and I would like us to improve our working relationship. So positive, I've really enjoyed working with you. Area for concern, over the last month I've felt upset or angry by the things you do, and positive, I would like us to improve our working relationship. Now, I think I might also say at the outset that I'm talking as if this is, a dream, and I'm talking as if this is so easy to do. It's not, ladies and gentlemen. I know that this is really difficult, and there are some of you on the line who would not be able to do this because let's say that the person who you struggle with is the CEO or the business owner who's your direct manager, and it's very difficult. So I think it's important that I make the comment that whilst I'm whizzing through the slides and making it easier, it's not that easy all the time. It can be quite difficult. But be positive around these people if possible, never ignoring them or being rude yourself. I think that two rude people don't make one polite one. So I always say, for example, if somebody comes in and sulks and ignores you, don't ignore them. You might say, oh, hi, Jane, or hi, John, or whoever it is, but don't lower yourself to their level, because ultimately it just becomes a battleground of silence and disrespect, and then the whole team morale feels affected, and you whiz by down to low performance. So I hope that was very helpful for you, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about that, I'm jumping a bit. If there are any questions, please feel free to call me or email me. We run leadership and team development programs. We run 24 one-day programs dealing with conflict, organizational resilience, emotional intelligence at work. We do coaching and a lot of leadership retreats. So we take leaders away for 2 to 3 days and teach them how to lead. So if you'd like to go to www.puremagicbusiness.com.au and see what we offer, we welcome you to do that or encourage you to do that. If you book any one program with us before March end, there's a 5% discount. 2, you get a 10% discount. But if you do, and you'd have to go through the website, please, or you can go directly to my email address, please can you quote the code 2360. And if you go for longer programs, and the longer programs are Leadership in Action, Emerging Leaders, Women in Business, and Top Teams, we would discuss a discount for those. And the code 2360 is what you need to mention. So there you go. If you want to deal with rude and difficult people, have highly performing teams and effective leadership, we certainly are very able and capable to help you and would love to do so. I threw this in. There's another group I run called Empowering Women to Thrive. And that was a webinar held tonight before this one. And on the 1st of April, we're running a one-day seminar for women. And it's called Communicate Assertively and Confidently as a Woman. Say what you mean and mean what you say to be heard. You can get tickets through stickytickets.com.au, and we would love you to be there. It starts at 9, ends at 4, and it's at the Master Builders Association, which is just across the road from Sydney Uni. But if you're interested in coming, and we'd love you to, please go on to stickytickets.com.au, or please feel free to email us on our email address, which is puremagicinfo@puremagicbusiness.com.au, or Pure Magic Business to see what we offer. So are there any questions that you would like me to answer for you? I'll take one or two, and then we'll call it an evening. So Jess is asking about a team leader who comes in one day really happy and very engaging and talking, and the next day just ignores everybody. And you're saying, Jess, that everybody finds it very difficult at work to deal with this behavior. So has anybody actually commented or spoken to her about this? Just answer me that with a quick type to me, please. So you're saying no. Okay, so if nobody addresses the problem with this person, then I promise you what will happen is it will continue. Because if you go back to the slides that I said earlier, you're just encouraging, condoning, and promoting bad behavior. The person needs to know that the impact of her behavior on the team is not good. And the rules that we have as a team is that we will be respectful and we will be supportive and encouraging of each other. And that means that when we come to work in the morning, we greet each other. If we've got personal problems, then we talk about it. Or we might say to our team members, look, guys, struggling a little bit at home at the moment, just leave me a bit because I don't mean to be rude, but I just need a bit of time out. That's completely different to being ignored or somebody sulking. So Jess, as a team, because you're all struggling, you need to actually have that conversation. Again, be supportive. Hamburg, I appreciate that things may be going on, or you might say, we really enjoy working with you. When you come into work some days and ignore us, it's really difficult for us as a team because we never know what we're going to get. It's like a box of chocolates. What am I going to get? And ultimately what we want in the future is we'd like you to come to work consistently happy and consistently polite, because that's part of our code of conduct and our rules. So those are expectations. That's what we said we would do, and that's what we're asking you to do and to live by. So, wow, what a great webinar it's been, ladies and gentlemen. It is just almost time. As I said earlier, please feel free to contact us at www.puremagicbusiness.com.au. We work all over Australia. Obviously, we go regionally, we go rurally, we work internationally. We run monthly webinars. We do lots of Skype coaching. I do lots of WhatsApp coaching, Viber coaching. And we would be really, really happy to work with you if you would like us to. You know where we are. And the code, if you wanted to invest in a program before the end of March, if you go onto the website, you get a 5% discount for 110 for 2, and code is 2360. So thank you so much for attending. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've loved having you with me this evening. So speak to you next month, and until then, stay safe. Take care. Bye.